This is Anna V. Eskamani, State Representative for District 42 in the Florida House. Welcome to a new episode of the Bump Podcast.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Bump Podcast. I'm your host Shamir, here with my co-host and beloved brother Nabil.
Hey everybody.
And we have a very special guest here on the podcast today. She is the state representative for District 42 here in the state of Florida. Her name is Anna V. Eskamani, so let's give her a warm welcome.
Hi
Thanks for joining us. Hi.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Awesome. Thank you for coming. We really appreciate you as always.
For
sure. You're a very busy woman.
That she is.
A little bit.
It's been about a month to get you on here, but it's okay. So
we did it. We did it.
Yeah, we did it. We did it, guys.
Thank you for your patience.
Yeah, honestly. And thank you for all you do for our society, honestly, like we had said earlier.
Yes.
We try to bring positivity to the community and bring the community together.
Absolutely.
Through Bump Podcasts. So that's what we're trying to do and what we're trying to portray. So my first question to you is talk to us about your early life and your family.
Oh my gosh, I love to, especially being with two brothers. I love that because
Yeah,
I'm very close to my twin sister and my big brother. So
That's great.
I love sharing space with both of you. And much like I grew up in Central Florida. So I was born and raised in East Orlando. So I went to public schools, K-12, university, high school. Mm-hmm. And my family is made up of immigrants. So my parents actually came from Iran, but met each other working at the same donut shop in Orlando. So wow. A true American love story.
Right.
And as I mentioned, I have a twin sister and a big brother. And my parents are both working class as well. My dad actually went to UCF while raising 3 kids to get a degree in engineering. And though he started working in that field on the weekdays, he picked up a second job at Walt Disney World on the weekends to make ends meet. And he was a customer service rep, at what was back then Downtown Disney. Yep. And my mom worked at Kmart. I don't know if folks even remember Kmart.
Right.
Yeah, we're still part of that generation.
I know,
for sure.
Millennials, we remember the blue light specials. But
that's right.
But so my mom worked at Kmart for to the end of her life, because unfortunately she passed away after a long fight with colon cancer in 2004. So I was 13 years old when she passed away, and that was a huge, huge trauma. I mean, to this day, it's very hard for me. I get very emotional, especially when I'm in situations of grief, because I just know what it's like, and it's just really hard, especially to lose a parent when you're just growing up.
Yeah.
And so, with that said, if it wasn't for a few things in my life. I mean, public education was paramount for me, having a safe school to go to, a safe place to go to. But I also got really involved in different arts and culture spaces. Mm-hmm. I'm definitely a theater nerd. I found theater as a high school student. And I also found a lot of fandom and found just support in fandom. I'm a big Star Wars nerd. I can tell I'm in good company.
Yes, indeed.
And also a Beatles fan. I learned about the Beatles through my mom, and I actually kind of fell out of listening to a lot of music when my mom passed away. And I remember randomly, back then we used Pandora, and I remember hearing Here Comes the Sun pop up my playlist when I was maybe 14, 15, and I just started crying because it was one of those things where I think because it reminded me of my mom, I had created space between it, and then when I fell back into it, it was just such a comfort. And so So yeah, that's kind of just my, my origin growing up in Orlando. But I'm definitely an East Side girly, but now I live more downtown.
Okay.
But my roots are definitely in this community, and ended up at UCF as well, which I can definitely talk more about. But but that's kind of just the origin of growing up here in Orlando.
Awesome. What led you to politics and the Democratic Party?
Oh God. So nothing I ever expected, let me tell you.
Okay.
So my parents were both, I would say, incredibly open-minded.
Sure.
I remember going to my mom's citizenship ceremony when I was about 4 or 5 years old. We drove we had one car in the family. It was a Honda hatchback, and driving all the way to Miami to see her become a U.S. citizen, and she registered to vote. And so I never ever have taken voting for granted. My mom would take me to the polls with her. We would watch the presidential debates, but we never really focused or even knew about local government. I had no understanding of like, is there someone out there fighting for my family? Like I never had that context. And so as I grew up and started better understanding like just broken economic systems, broken policies that are not helping families, that are splitting families apart, that are making it harder for people to build a sense of efficacy, I started getting more aware. And when I got to college, and I do credit, by the way, a lot of this to my AP government teacher, Mr. Norris, who I had when I was a senior in high school. And he was just like your typical like middle-aged white dude, and he brought to the classroom so many issues that I never would have had exposure to if it wasn't for him. From the women's rights movement to immigrant rights movement to civil rights, like he really brought it to life for us in the classroom. And not only did I pass that AP exam, but I actually decided at that moment that I would minor in political science. So he also helped give me kind of a foundation. But like every immigrant family, my parents were like, or my mom did this when she was with me, and then my dad re-stressed it and as into my older age of like, you need to study physics, biology, and chemistry. And I was like, what? Like, I'm not interested in that, you know? So it took me a while to figure out what I wanted to do, but getting to UCF, where I first started as an environmental science major, but then eventually became a political science major and a women gender studies double major, opened me up to advocacy in a more structured and intentional way of like not just railing at the system, if you will, but actually kind of connecting the dots to say, oh, if you're upset about the rising cost of tuition or upset about the cuts to Bright Futures, which is a really important scholarship program for Florida students, who's the influencer of that, right? It's not happening in a vacuum. Like there are lawmakers in the state capitol that are doing this. And that type of understanding was very empowering to me. And so my first time to Tallahassee was at UCF Day at the Capitol, where I went up with other students to advocate for a lot of these issues. And of course, during that time, I was doing a lot of volunteerism on my college campus. But you asked about, becoming a Democrat. I actually was first no party affiliation. So my parents were both pretty liberal. Again, they were open-minded and they cared about the working class, and we were working class. But when I got registered to vote, I didn't want to pick the party just because my parents had a party. I wanted to figure it out for myself. So I chose no party affiliation. And in the summer of 2010, I was about 20 years old, and there were only two groups that were outside the student union tabling at UCF, and it was the College Democrats and the Iranian Student Organization, which I was a member of. And my sister and I, we were collecting human rights petitions for efforts in Iran, because as y'all know, Iran is unfortunately, under a very oppressive government, and so I'm always advocating for human rights here and abroad. And met the college Dems and just kind of fell in love with what they were doing. I never was attracted by political icons or a platform. I was really just attracted by the people. I was like, these are folks that care about the health and well-being of complete strangers. And I love that. Like, I just feel an alignment with that. And so became a Democrat that summer and also started volunteering at my local Planned Parenthood affiliate. And Planned Parenthood is the nation's leading provider of reproductive health, education, advocacy. And so to make a long story short, I started volunteering at Planned Parenthood after becoming a patient there, and then was offered a job upon my graduation, very entry level, to do basically fundraising. Like it was like I was an executive assistant and a fundraiser for events. And I eventually rose to become the Senior Director of Public Affairs and Communications across 22 counties. And that really was such an important exposure, again, to how disconnected many of our politicians are from what's happening on the ground. So reproductive rights is a big part of who I am. I've been engaged in the abortion rights movement for more than a decade now. And so that also kind of propelled me, to eventually decide to run for office as the first-time candidate in 2018.
Awesome.
What would you say to people who think politics is too hard to understand, so they really don't pay attention to it?
Oh, yeah. And I get this a lot, honestly.
Really?
And so the system is built to be inaccessible. And so if you feel that way, it's on purpose. It's on purpose because those in power don't want you to understand.
Of course.
Those in power don't want you to change it. They don't want you to vote. They don't want you to actually realize that this system is broken. If you feel like it's broken, it is designed to be. It is designed to keep people in different economic classes. It is designed for corporations to make decisions for us. Like, it's not, it is intentionally broken. But the only way we can fix it is if we take the time to understand it. And I take a lot of pride in trying to break these systems down, because when you break them down, it is much more tangible. So start small. You don't have to understand every federal agency, but let's look at the functions of Congress and what Congress can and can't do. Actually, let's bring it down even more local. Let's talk about your local government, right? The government that's closest to your home, the government that you actually have the most access to, like a state representative. And I think when you can bring it down to more of a micro level and see the impact on your daily life, then it's going to feel more relatable. You're going to feel more in control.
Yeah.
And so that's what I would offer as advice. And of course, you don't have that imposter syndrome. Like, don't think it is over your head. Every person has the capacity to understand how the legislature works, but you have to have the desire to want to know. You have to be willing to ask the questions. And I'm here to help. Like, we take so much pride in providing trainings, providing even just Q&A on social media, like to help people understand and to give you the insider perspective, because I do think that we're not going to be successful in fixing these systems if we operate in silos. We have to practice what I like to call collaborative governance, which is the inside-outside strategy, where you have your decision makers, right, who are, quote, inside the system. But then instead of cutting off folks who are on the ground every day, directly impacted community members, advocacy organizations, faith leaders, bring them inside, and vice versa. Bring us outside. So when we work together, then we're building policy that's not coming from some think tank or corporation, but it's coming from citizens, everyday people. And that's the only way we're going to solve these problems, if we work together. But I do think that people, it's not only a sense of overwhelmed by the information, overwhelmed by the complexity of these systems, but I sense a sense of disenchantment right now among especially younger people. And so I really, really want to encourage that if you feel a sense of despair in our political climate, it is not a call to disengage. It is actually a call for action. The antidote to despair is action. And the system's not going to get better if you tap out.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yes, thank you for that. Because right now in Puerto Rico, there's over 300,000 people without light. And it bothers me because at the end of the day, if we look back in history, like last year I was in my philosophy class. We were reading on like back in the day, France, the British and all these people and how they used to handle their problems. There was a group of ladies, I think it was like 3,000 women went out one day to protest because of what was going on. And they ended up, you know, in those times they would murder politicians and all types of crazy things just to get out of power. Nowadays, obviously, that's outrageous. But realistically, if you know a little bit about the history of Puerto Rico, Ricky Rosselló, how was he gotten out of power? How did he get out of power? People did protests. They closed down one of the main roads, which leads to the airport in Puerto Rico.
Absolutely.
And they're like, if you don't leave, we're going to make you leave. So right now, there's 300,000 people without light. There's the bureaucracy and the things that are occurring is because at the end of the day, people are not coming together to be like, hey, we need to get the people that are in powers, out of power and put people that actually want to work for the country and make this thing work, because there's funding, Luma and all these other things that.
Totally. And the privatization is part of the corruption in everywhere across the world, but also in Puerto Rico. I mean, you mentioned the utility company. That's part of it, is that you do have politicians that are paid and bought by these corporations. And so they're making decisions that in their personal best interest, but not the best interest of the society, of the community. And I do think one of the biggest challenges we have in all of our democracies is the influence, the gross influence of corporations. We're to the point where we've built, their plutocracies, like those who have the most money have the most influence, and that's not what democracy should look like. But it doesn't change, to your point, if we don't fight back. And again, I think it's frustrating for folks because I do hear and I empathize with the notion of, well, I voted and nothing changed. But we have to remember that voting is one tool in collective liberation. It's not the only tool we have to use. it is that constant 24/7 engagement with your civil society, with organizations who are helping to pursue accountability measures, to calling out the corporate greed, to also calling out the corporations. I mean, you know, these are brands. We have choices where we spend our money. So to also be critical about that. And I do want to affirm your point about the unity piece, because I do feel like those who benefit from the status quo pursue divide and conquer tactics who keep us apart.
Right.
And I just, it's so frustrating because I have to have debates with people over issues that are not even issues, right? Like the culture wars in general. It's like, why are we debating this? Like, just let people live. You shouldn't care about, you know, rainbow flags. Why is that bothering you right now, right? Like, this is not a real policy debate. The policy debate should be about our economic structures and the tax breaks corporations get, and insurance, property insurance right now. Like, we should be talking about this substantive policy and ways to make people's lives better, to solve problems. We do have politicians that benefit from chaos, and much of this chaos is manufactured. And so, you know, when you hear political rhetoric, I also really encourage folks not to fall trap to it, because oftentimes it is just designed to divide us versus finding where we have commonality, which is more often than not that we have more in common than what sets us apart.
Is it safe to assume in your case that part of the division as well has to do with what they put on the news, what they put on social media, and, you know, constantly drawing that?
100%. I mean, the reality is that, you know, our media, so media thrives on conflict, right? And so there's, so like that's, I mean, at the end of the day, when I do interviews, it's so funny. Like, I run into people and they're like, yeah, I watch on the news all the time, that kind of stuff. And they're like, you know, you look so like happy right now. And I'm like, well, yeah, because when you see me on the news, I'm often having to respond to like very serious situations. And I wish they would reach out to me when it's positive, but I only get reached out to when it's negative.
Yeah, of course.
And so like what ends up happening is, to your point, the constant media that we take in is always negative.
Yeah.
And the you know, logarithms on social media do this too. You know, when I post something, before we went on air, we talked about the diaper tax break, right? So one of the bills that I helped champion after 5 years was to eliminate Florida's tax on children's diapers, adult incontinence products. When I posted about this, it gets like zero attention compared to if I post something that is agitational towards DeSantis. And to be clear, I do not like DeSantis, and like I will hold him accountable. But I do notice that like posts that are more negative in nature, right, that are speaking to a contrast, to a conflict, get more attention than anything else. And, you know, I try to challenge this. Like, I do think like video content tends to, you know, provide a larger reach than images. So I'm trying to like create more content that's positive, that's video, because I'm trying to play with the logarithms to like get this in front of your, you know, in front of your follow page. But it's just like very challenging because people are more driven to conflict than anything else. And those are the comments that get the most likes. Those are going to be, you know, what always pops in your news feed. And it just feeds into this culture of animosity where, again, you wouldn't get that if you were just talking to people in 3D. But like on the digital platforms, it's just very toxic.
So do you believe humans by nature are counterintuitive?
That's a really great question. I mean, I think that all these large corporations that, you know, profit off our engagement have realized that, you know, conflict drives likes, conflict drives the ad dollars. And so at the end of the day, like we as our human behavior needs to challenge that, because I don't believe that I don't believe it is true. I don't believe that when anyone is scrolling, you know, doom scrolling, do you feel better after you do that? Like, no. Right? And so I don't think humans are designed to have access and like constant content pushed towards us that is negative. And so I think a part of it is like you also have to seek out more positive content, because it is out there, but you almost have to seek it out. And I'm so grateful that y'all do this podcast, because you're adding to that, right? You're adding positivity and storytelling and really trying to demonstrate that like positive dialogue and conversations, like there's a need for it and there's a demand for it. So I do think it's that notion, if you build it, people will come, but we have to be willing to build it and not take the easy route, which is conflict.
Right. the world right now, I think the world is always, we're in a constant state where we have good at a certain period of time, 100 years, 200 years, then another 200 years down the road, we probably have, a lot of good. For example, the Enlightenment period,
right,
where there was a lot of innovation at the time. So I'm assuming those times were really progressive in humanity. Right now, we're going through a lot of war, a lot of situations.
Yeah.
So I just feel like right now we're in that negative state, but I know at some point it's going to get, like, I'm going to say by my experience, I did so much bad in my past life and in my criminal life that it got to a point that it was just like, this has to end.
Right.
Like, it really has to end because this is just so much negative.
Yeah.
Like, there's no positive around here.
Right.
Obviously, the positive is now that I learned from those experiences, but it's just that cleansing period is what I'm trying to say, is that it happens in everybody's life, that there is good and bad, but there's times of good moments and bad moments. So if we look at a whole society and population, we see that these things occur. So I think that at some moment, people will start looking for more positivity and all these things and stop liking so much the negative and all that.
Yeah.
But right now we're just in that state where there's more negative. It leads me to this question as well. We're approaching the elections. What do you think people need in order to come together as a community in the midst of all the havoc occurring in the world? For example, university riots and the war in Palestine.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, this is where, like, I get so frustrated too, because I understand why, especially young voters, are not interested in their options. I mean, personally, I really wish that Biden just served one term and would allow younger leaders, because we have a bench. This is what really frustrates me, is that we actually have a bench of like really strong Democratic candidates for president, but everyone stepped back to let Biden run again. And, this is, again, like, I really do feel like, and I'm a millennial, right? So I'm talking to my fellow millennials and my Gen Zers. Sure. It's in the next, not even a decade, I would say the next like 5 years, we are going to be in the position to make decisions and replacing those of an older generation. Like it'll be the rise of millennials and Gen Z, where we're going to be the CEOs, we're going to be the members of Congress, there'll be a major cultural shift, which is why we're having the backlash, by the way. Like, I do feel like the backlash we're experiencing today, folks often brand it as being partisan. I actually think it's more generational. I really do. I think that that there's been such rapid culture shift in the last 20 years that it's been exploited to create discomfort among our elders who do vote more often than younger people. And so this tension that we're sensing and witnessing, I think it's more driven by a generational divide than it is by any type of political divide. I think it translates into politics, but it didn't start political. I mean, the politicians have exploited it, but they were poking at people's insecurities about a changing society and being left behind, which I would argue that no one has to be left behind. Like, change is inevitable, but it doesn't have to isolate anyone or create an environment where some progress and others don't. We all rise up together. It doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. But this mentality of my success is tied to your failure has been embedded in American society. And that is what is being exploited to further divide us on all these issues. You mentioned the war in Palestine and what is happening to Gaza. And I do think that the United States is responsible for this action and needs to immediately stop, which the Biden administration is finally listening to the majority of Americans who are saying this. And yet they're moving at a glacier speed, which is incredibly frustrating because people are dying because of it. And the hostages are still hostages.
And I'm sorry to cut you off.
No,
what
please.
Really hurts me the most is that I have a son that's a 1-year-old, and seeing these children decapitated,
that's
that disgusts me completely. Like it breaks my soul, and I hope that the United States and everybody decides to do something. And I believe in peaceful protest. I believe that people should go out and speak their mind in a peaceful manner. What bothers me the most is that law enforcement now is technically the government, essentially, right?
Yep, state. It's the state.
It's the state.
Yeah.
And they're just out of nowhere. They'll do something to provoke the other person, or the protesters,
and a whole riot starts.
And then a whole riot starts,
it's
and
escalation.
then they're like, it's escalation, and then that's what leads.
People getting arrested,
but then the news says, "Oh, the riot happened." But how did it start?
It was provoked.
Let's start. Let's talk about the main point, which is what you said earlier. Let's talk about the main points instead of pointing out just what you want to point out. And
so this past even just 2 months, I've had to put out statements regarding two different situations where there were protesters for peace and law enforcement escalated, leading to conflict.
Sure.
And so it's incredibly frustrating. And what I often remind young people who come to me and say, both parties suck, I'm not going to vote, I'm going to vote for third party. I often remark back to 2 points. One is that history shows us we've been here before. We've been in very similar situations before. And the Vietnam War, as an example, hugely unpopular among the American community, major protests, especially on college campuses with young people. A lot of folks voted third party because they were so upset. Sure. And then you had Richard Nixon, which put us in a worse situation. So if you think it can't get worse, it actually can. And there is no floor to how bad things can be. So to really, really reflect on that. The second point is I don't see it as having to pick a side that aligns with you 100%. Because honestly, in a two-party system, it's going to be very hard to ever find a party where you 100% align. I know I don't with my own party. With that said, you have to look at your ballot sometimes as if you're voting for your adversary. Who do you want across the table from you to influence?
Sure.
Because at the end of the day, if you are going to protest, if you're going to engage in advocacy, you want to have a target that's more willing to listen to you, a target that at least reflects your values more than not. And I really do firmly believe that having Biden in the White House, having Biden's appointees in the White House, make a much easier influential target, if you will, right? I can organize them better than I can ever organize a Trump administration. And so really thinking about my adversary, who picking your enemy, if you will, right? And from a harm reduction model, Biden is absolutely the best option from a harm reduction model too. So I really encourage us to kind of frame it in a different way, and it will get better because millennials and Gen Z, we are rising up. And so this is some of the final elections where we're not the majority. So it is very frustrating, but in 5-10 years, it will change dramatically. And we need to be ready to pick up that mantle. And a part of that is getting engaged and staying engaged now.
Sure.
I know you talked about it a little bit earlier on, but like, I want you to dive a little bit deeper with this where, like, again, if you need to tell somebody to educate themselves, right? And again, you said it's important to take action in order to be able to educate yourself and whatnot. Would it be safe to say that, let's say you would ask them, okay, well, what are your interests? And then do you think you can dive into that?
Oh, yeah.
In order to be able to at least start? For
sure. I mean, you want to be passionate about what you want to advocate on, right?
Yeah.
So I that's actually some of my first advice to folks who want to get more civically engaged is, all right, what do you care about? Because what you care about will then lead to the level of government that most intersects with that issue. So for example, if immigration is your big issue, if you care about immigration, I probably recommend honing in on federal agencies, honing in on Congress more than the state. Just because immigration policy is primarily going to be conducted at a national level. Don't get me wrong, Governor DeSantis loves to attack immigrants, so we do have fights in the state legislature. But when it comes to jurisdiction and the system most responsible, it's going to be federal issues. If you care about public education or the incarceral system, these are going to be primarily state issues. I mean, obviously the incarceral system does have federal laws as well, but most folks who are going to face incarceration in Florida are going to go through the state system. And so look at the state penal code, look at our law enforcement regulations at the local level. Consider the funding that goes towards corrections and the intersection of private prisons and that. And so the issue you care about can then lead you to understand the systems that intersect with it, and it can help you find out the organizations who are doing the work. Because this is something else that's very overwhelming for folks who are like, well, I don't I've never been to Tallahassee before. I won't know what to do when I get there. But there are so many awesome organizations that are going to help you. Like they already do Days of the Capitol. They already have the bill sheets and the lawmaker list. And so I really encourage folks to like go to Tallahassee with an organization that aligns with the values you care about. And then you'll be able to develop those muscles, those advocacy muscles. That's how I did it. I mean, like I said earlier, my first time in Tallahassee was with UCF Day at the Capitol. My first time in the federal U.S. Capitol was with Planned Parenthood, advocating for reproductive rights issues. So none of this, happens from like scratch. Like you're often aligning yourself with organizations that reflect your values, reflect the issues you care about, and then you grow from there. And then be a mentor. Oh my God, be a mentor. Like, Ego should be everyone's worst enemy. Like, let go of ego, work with others, and whatever you learn, teach it to others because we build power together. Power is not a scarce resource.
I love that. That's a great really perspective to
have. So my question to you is, do you think everyone's voice and opinions matter within society?
That's a really great question. I mean, idealistically speaking, yes. But I do think that when we look at how government functions today, those who make the largest political contributions tend to have a lot more influence. So you need to elect people that are going to challenge that. So when I look at how I manage my campaigns, and I've now run for office 4 times, and I run a campaign that's very grassroots. I don't take money from corporations like the theme parks, private prisons, banks, fossil fuel companies, big agriculture. And the reason why is I don't want to be influenced. I don't want the perception of influence either, because sometimes in politics, optics matters more than reality. So you have to be really sensitive to that. But I love being able to vote on a bill and not have the weight, of a lobbyist check hanging over me. I like to make decisions that are based on what my constituents need and also logically what is the best interest of society, not one specific stakeholder who has lots of money. And I think when you operate in that terms, it does create it creates a horizontal structure where everyone has an equal say in the decision of that policy. So I'm a big believer. I mentioned earlier collaborative governance. I think collaborative governance creates an ecosystem where every voice does matter. Sure. Now, of course, in my case, the voices of District 42 are going to carry more weight than others because these are the folks that elected me to serve them. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the day, when it comes to policy, if there might be a situation where communities in a different part of the state feel differently than the folks in my community, and I need to, of course, listen to my community because I'm elected to uphold the values of District 42. But more often than not, when you listen to everyday people, as I alluded to before, we have a lot in common. And so I find a lot of the fights in Tallahassee not to necessarily be red versus blue. A lot of the fights are people versus corporations. And those are the fights that don't get a lot of attention compared to the more controversial topics. But my God, do they make a difference? Because if you don't ensure that corporations, for example, are paying their taxes, not only are we going to end up paying more because we have to make up the difference, but then you're not going to see strong safety nets that address poverty, that prevent people from even turning to criminality, right? Mm-hmm. Like you're not going to see the investments in public education. And there are very specific data points that correlate literacy rates among our young people and the prison population. In fact, prisons are built using literacy rate data. So those who build prisons will look to see what are the reading rates with kids in these zip codes? Oh, we're gonna need a prison here in 30 years based on the reading rates of our kids now.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so we can invest in good schools and reading programs and career opportunities if corporations are not paying their taxes. We don't have the money. And if corporations continue to exploit, workers at these wages that are just impossible to make a living, then of course people are going to turn to other means to pay their bills, take care of their families, and the cycle continues, right? And so we're going to disrupt these cycles. You got to do things a little bit differently and elect people that are going to look at these problems not from who has the biggest checkbook, but what is in the best interest of constituents as a whole. So all of that makes a big difference. Mm-hmm. And I think people do matter and people do have a voice, but we have to elect people who are going to weigh those voices either at the same level or at a higher level than corporate actors. Sure. And that's, almost every problem we can come up with from clean air, clean water, from the cost of healthcare in this country to mass incarceration. Almost every one of these issues are tied to corporate greed.
Yeah.
And so many politicians, Democrats and Republicans, are not willing to say that because that's where their political donations come from.
Yeah, that makes sense. Changing the subject a little bit, what strategies do you employ to remain open-minded when receiving criticism? Essentially, does criticism hurt you?
Oh my God. I mean, it definitely hurts me for sure. I mean, there's no way that you're only human. I think people, especially on the internet, they think that either I'm not reading comments or, you know, like I have someone else read them. And the reality is that, like, I see most of it. I mean, I'm always going to miss something, but like I see most of it. And I am, at the end of the day, like, I am a human and I don't come from a political background. And I try to, you know, have like a mesh almost so I can process information, but it can always sting, right? So I think it's important to be sensitive to that. To that same point, though, as elected official, you also should expect it and prepare for it.
Sure.
And I have developed a lot of grit throughout this process, and I also try to practice grace to others and grace to myself. Wow. So I'm not going to be perfect, and that person who is sharing the criticism is also imperfect, but their criticism is hopefully coming from a very thoughtful place.
Yeah. And
I also think about, is it always about me specifically, or is it about the system that I've inherited? Sure. And so that also helps me process feedback, not to take it personally. So it might sting in the beginning, but then I try to process and respond where it's not personal. And I think when you act in that way, it also creates an opportunity for dialogue, which I'm always open to. Unfortunately, some of the criticism is just coming from trolls. And if it's coming from trolls, it's like, okay.
They got nothing better to do.
Yeah. And like, I'm not going to be vulnerable to trolls. But like, if it's meaningful feedback that, you know, is addressing policy and that, I mean, I absolutely will take it to good heart and good measure. And I really try to live up to that expectation of I take feedback, I will respond, and I will take action on it. So I try hard to practice that too.
Okay. Like I told you earlier, we saw you at the at MegaCon. Talk to us about your fandom a little bit.
Yeah.
How'd that happen?
Oh my gosh. So I've always been a huge Star Wars fan. Yes. And
I knew I liked her for a reason.
So I, like you, I'm sure, grew up watching Star Wars. Of course. And so my dad is who exposed me to the original sequel. And then I was 9 years old, right, when the Phantom Menace came out. I actually saw episode 3 like 7 times in theater with my twin sister.
Beat me. We only saw it once.
Oh my god, we went back so many times.
I wish.
But I mentioned earlier the passing of my mom, and I do think that my fandom was a process for grieving.
Sure.
To have that outlet. And I just find Star Wars to be so inspirational, and there's so many motifs and values that come out of it for me. But growing up, it was also like an escape, honestly. It was at a time where I was trying to figure out who I wanted to be. Yeah. Star Wars was a safety net. Like I used to wear like a Star Wars like wristbands and like t-shirts. I'm still obsessed today, but it was like more public facing obsession when I was younger. Sure. And I found comfort in it. And I think it was a little nostalgic, right? To connect back to a time in my childhood where I had both parents and things were much more simpler. But then as I got older, I saw it as the storytelling was very inspirational and to tell me to keep going. That even when I'm going through shit, like to keep going, right? And the loyalty of friends is another value that I get out of Star Wars that I practice in my life too. With that said, you know, I as a lawmaker, I find lots of inspirational motivation out of Star Wars. Like I feel like I'm walking into the Death Star when I go to Tallahassee, you know, and like I mean it's literally like I'm in the system. I'm trying to take it down from the inside, and you know, and so I'm not even kidding. Sometimes I'll play like, you know, the soundtrack in the morning to like get me in the mood because I'm just like, oh my gosh, it's gonna be a hard day, you know, and so
so you're part of the Rebel Alliance, is what you're saying?
Absolutely. Actually, I have a tattoo.
What?
I have the Rebel insignia. Yep, right behind my ear. My twin sister and I both have it. And I will say, too, that I bonded with so many of my teachers through Star Wars. And actually, one of my teachers just passed away suddenly from cancer, Mr. Moore. And he was one of my English teachers. Amazing. But I really connect with him over Star Wars when I was, just a junior in high school. My mom had just passed away like 2-3 years ago. And he gave me such a safe outlet. And it was him and Mr. Bingle, my math teacher. And I mean, again, so even just as like a connector, I think it's such a powerful connector for people. And that sense of family is very important, especially for young people who don't maybe have their blood family close to them. Then you kind of build this like fandom family. And that also is just so powerful as a tool of solidarity.
So we saw the video that Mark Hamill
it doesn't get any better than that.
That was so awesome. How did that come about?
And I've had the pleasure of meeting Mark
on
3 different occasions.
No, Mark is so you've actually I've actually never met Mark in person. So like we have a virtual relationship. So like I love the fact that you've actually met him in 3D. I have yet to meet him in 3D, but I really want to. So okay,
you have to make it happen.
Yeah.
Yes, please, Mark. If you're watching, I need to still meet you. So so Mark is such a sweet story. So I turned off social media notifications. Like I think one of my 2020 resolutions was like, won't disable my notifications because it's too much. Like you look at my phone, it was just like bing, 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 and like
it'll drain your battery.
Oh, drain my battery and like drain my brain. Like it's just too much, right? And so I was like, I'm gonna disable notifications, and so I will look at them occasionally, but it's not a constant for me. I pick and choose the times to look, right, versus it being always in my radar. And so out of nowhere, I realized. Out of nowhere, that Mark Hamill was following me on Twitter. And it was, and again, because I turned off notifications, I never saw it when it happened. But he liked one of my posts, and I was like, what? You know what I mean? And then I look at his account, I'm like, whoa, like he's following me. Like, he used the Force, literally. I had no idea. And so now I'm like super excited. I'm like, are you kidding me right now? This is amazing.
I'm doing something right.
I know. And so that strikes up like, so now I'm like actively engaged with him because I'm like, Mark, thank you for following me. I didn't realize you were following me. So we're just tweeting, nothing like DM. We're just like tweeting. And
that's so cool.
And so, he engages with his followers occasionally, that kind of stuff.
Does. Yeah.
And so in 2020, during the COVID years, Mark was a surrogate for the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party will have these like kind of celebrity surrogates that will help them with events and promotions, that kind of stuff. So long story short, he was scheduled to do a virtual phone bank event with the Democratic Party here in Florida, which I was like, oh, that's cool. I didn't really think too much about it. I mentioned earlier that I'm not always aligned with the party, and that is a constant theme for me. And so I don't get invited to a lot of party stuff.
Okay.
And even
you're just too cool for them. Don't worry.
As an example, like they had Fetterman as their keynote speaker this year, and I was like, why would I go to that? You know what I mean? So like there are times where like I am personally making a decision not to engage as well, but in this situation, like I was not going to be invited to play any role whatsoever in this event at all. I had former interns that were some of the organizers, which is they were doing a great job, but the decision makers were not going to invite me to be part of this event.
Sure.
But then I got a call from the Biden campaign in 2020, and they said, Mark Hamill wants you to co-host this event with him. Oh, and I was like, nice. Oh, homeboy literally used the Force. Because again, the party wasn't going to invite me to do that. But Mark was like, oh, I follow this girl. Like, can she be there? Cool. And I was like, what? And so that was my first interaction with Mark, was we did a Zoom together.
That's so cool.
And I interviewed him basically like before the phone bank started. And then long story short, I reached back out to him. I didn't have his email, so I didn't have a way of contacting him. So I can't share my ways, but I was able to get his like booking email.
Oh my God.
And so I just emailed him, and it wasn't actually him who responded, it was someone else.
Of course,
but they were able to confirm him to be my main speaker at a virtual kickoff event that I did for my 2022 campaign. Dang, so Mark was our keynote speaker, and that's where that video comes from.
Okay.
And
that's so wild.
And I will tell you, Mark stayed the entire Zoom. Like, most people, they just...
In and out.
Yes, he stayed for the entire program. I mean, it was like one of my sister actually screenshotted a photo of him smiling while I'm talking, and that's printed on my table in my office. It's so funny. Everyone's like, is that Mark Hamill? And I'm like, yeah, it's Mark.
We're buddies.
I know. And so he's such a good human. He really is such a good human. Yeah. And so, yeah, I feel... I mean, I never would have imagined, as a 10-year-old watching Star Wars that I would get to work with Mark. Like, it's just crazy how the world, universe spins. But I mean,
the Force works.
I know, but he's pretty
definitely
awesome.
powerful, ladies and gentlemen.
Absolutely,
that's awesome.
All right, so I want to talk a little bit about laws real quick.
Yeah.
What changes? In your opinion, what changes should be made to existing gun laws to address gun violence effectively?
Oh, yeah, that's such a great question. So we need violence intervention programs that are peer-to-peer driven. So I do think one of the first investments, and we actually have advocated for funding in Florida around this arena of violence intervention programs, but the governor has vetoed it. So the federal government has been championing violence intervention dollars. In fact, City of Orlando has a new-ish violence intervention program that basically hires folks who come from the community. So folks who either have served time or, engaged in different gang behavior and so forth. But it's that peer-to-peer mentality. So they hire community ambassadors that have this experience so they can better connect, especially with young people who are going down that path. And they can be those mentors. Because, I mean, for so many of our young people, they just don't have any type of guidance, right? And this is the only world they know. And it's heartbreaking because you have juveniles that are 16, 17 who are having to go multiple times in the juvie system, eventually into the adult person system, because there is no intervention.
Sure.
And so I do think investing in intervention programs is really essential. And my twin sister was actually robbed by 4 juveniles about 2 years ago in Thornton Park. And it was a random act of crime. 3 out of the 4 youth had past criminal backgrounds. Only one was his first time. Wow. And these are kids. I mean, they're babies, right? Like, they have baby faces. Like, they should not be in a court with an ankle monitor, right? And yet, if we're not going to intervene in these systems and look at the disparities that lead youth in this direction, the problem's only going to get worse.
Of course.
Now, I do think access to firearms, the readily available access to firearms, is a problem. Not only do we just have adult gun owners who are not locking their firearms and just leaving their firearms for children to access, which is kids are killing themselves, and of course bringing them to school, that there has to be action done. And whether it's, I mean, I'm a firm believer in having regulations around storage of firearms, but education can also be a solution here. But people need to lock their guns. And by the way, gun locks also help reduce suicide rates, because the more, we don't talk about this, but one of the leading causes of death with guns is suicide.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's predominantly men who are doing this. And research tells us that if you create barriers to accessing that firearm, whether it's the gun has a lock on it, the gun is locked in a storage container, the gun's in a closet, those steps that someone would take to access a firearm are steps where they might rethink this decision. So there is evidence to say that it also can be a suicide prevention tool. Yeah. But the access to firearms in this country, it's just so incredibly easy, and that needs to be addressed. And I do think comprehensive background checks, including for guns that are purchased, off of the market, if you will, is going to be essential. And I do believe that assault weapons need to be regulated and should not be in our streets. I just, for anyone who says they hunt with an AR-15, then you're not a good hunter. I'm sorry. Yeah. You need to use a different gun. And so I really don't see a place for assault weapons to be so readily available in society. So I would like to see regulations on assault weapons as well.
Okay. Couldn't agree more.
And my last question, if you had the ability to change one of the 27 amendments or something within the first 10, which is the Bill of Rights, what would it be and why?
Oh my God, that's such a great question. I would really love to see some more clarity and more specific outline of the separation of church and state, which I know comes from the Establishment Clause. And the reason why I say that is that I have colleagues who are totally reinterpreting the separation of church and state right now for their own pleasing, and it's really unsettling. Mm-hmm. So basically saying that it was never about separating religion from government. It was actually about keeping government out of the impact of religion, like almost saying that the point was for religion to be everywhere so that government isn't restricting it. And I'm just like, how did you get to that conclusion? Like, I mean, this country was founded on people experiencing religious persecution. And so they were settling in an environment where they wanted that separation. And somehow that's become a framing of, no, actually, it means that we want Christianity. We want Christian nationalism and fascism to be everywhere, which is the antithesis to our society and what we're built upon, which is diversity of religious expression and so forth. And so I really would have appreciated clarity because now it's getting reinterpreted like so many of our protections, and that is unsettling to me. But it's hard because when you have strict constitutionalists who are reading things textually, it gives them the ability to try to rewrite precedent, and that's scary because then all the progress that we've made upon our Bill of Rights, upon amendments, lead us into a place where folks are willing to rewrite history for their own benefit. And there might very well be in the near future a constitutional convention, which is incredibly scary. And it's not an issue that gets a lot of attention, but you have folks that are trying to build momentum in conservative spaces for what would be the first constitutional convention since the founding of our Constitution, to rewrite everything to benefit those in power. And not good. Even conservative justices have said an Article 5 convention would be incredibly dangerous. But there are people organizing for it right now. So gotta be ready for anything.
Yeah.
We thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it.
Super enlightening.
Listeners, do you want to give one last little bit of piece of advice?
Yeah.
For anybody that wants
my God.
to pursue anything in life?
I'm still figuring stuff out myself, right? Like I'm only 34 years old. But if there's any advice I can offer, it is to trust your gut while also seeking mentors. And so ask for guidance, but trust your gut, because you probably know what the right answer is. But I do think it's important that we surround ourselves with people that we trust, people that care about us. And if you have someone in your life that doesn't care about you, like, please find a way to get them out of your circle, because good vibes only, right?
Sure.
And you don't want to surround yourself with people that are manipulative or exploitative.
Correct.
And like, just, know that you are valued, you are deserving, you deserve to feel valued. And if anyone makes you feel less than, you don't have to have them in your life.
Yeah, and that's something that we want to emphasize here on this platform, which is essentially that anyone can feel free to come on here and have their voice be heard. They can open up about anything they can.
Awesome.
If they feel like they don't have someone, because we've both been in a situation where we felt that, comment down below, message us, reach out. We're not saying we are the solution by any stretch of the imagination, but certainly at least you know that you can be heard, and we can hopefully help y'all point you in the right direction of seeking the type of help that you actually need. We can't stress that enough. So
absolutely.
So we thank you guys for tuning in. We love you guys. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We are going to put your campaign on the link down below as well.
Yeah, which is my email. So keep in touch with me too.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll put all your social platforms as well. So thank you guys for tuning in. It'll be until the next time. Take care, guys.
See ya.
May the force be with you.
Ooh, always.